First, I'd like to thank all of you for coming out to this third in our 5 Haskayne Hours that we're offering this year. And I'm assuming because you're all here, you're all on the right side of the cultural moment. My name is Lauren Falkenberg. I am the Associate Dean Strategic Initiatives at the Haskayne School of Business and help organize Haskayne Hour. So this morning, we have a unique set of presenters in that they share more in common than our normal presenters. We have Scott Hughes, who is the VP of Insight and Planning at Critical Mass, and we're having them come up one at a time so you can tell them apart. Okay, so we have the two Scotts. This is Scott Hughes. And Scott, I'd also like to thank him because I don't know if you noticed the rotation of advertisements as you were eating your breakfast. That was, Scott put that together to help, in a sense, set the mood and set the tone of the conversation. Scott is also responsible for using analytics to understand consumer trends, which is something that I think is becoming really important. He works in the real world, all right? The other Scott, who, as he comes up, you'll notice these two share haircuts, they share glasses together, they bike together, like it's, okay. But this Scott works in the educational world. He's our Associate Dean Teaching and Learning in the Haskayne School of Business, and his area of research is in marketing, and he has a unique research area. It is consumer responses to celebrity deaths. Okay, so it's, but that's not what we're talking about today. I'd like to turn the stage over to the two of you and start the discussion.
Thanks, Lauren. So as Lauren mentioned, we had the slides looping at the beginning, and we really thought that was, as we started talking about this conversation, we said, well, how do we link this idea of the cultural moment? And so I'm going to turn this over to Scott, who did those slides, and ask him, well, what do these have in common? What did you see in those slides that brought them together?
Yeah, it was interesting when we started this this talk and thinking about it. But what I wanted to show everyone is looking at brands that have actually started to join this cultural conversation, and really looking at these brands that are tapping into consumer belief associated with these cultural conversations. So whether that consumer belief is women empowerment, equal pay, bullying, LGBT rights, immigration, and just showing, some of these brands are doing it really well, joining this conversation, and they're getting a great response from consumers and from the public, and then some aren't doing so well. So we'll talk a bit about kind of that mix.
And when we talked about this idea of the cultural moment, we thought this was an interesting way of thinking about those things that emerge, those events that emerge in popular media and in cultural context. But those are very often part of a deeper underlying movement, something that's happening. And so those things on the prior slide with gender empowerment, things like that, are really about these larger movements. And BBDO describes this as an iceberg, that there's this larger movement underneath, but the moment is that little tip that peaks above the water, and that thing that you see. And it's how do we respond to those moments in a way where we're thinking about what the movement is that's underlying it. So when Colin Kaepernick kneels at a football game, that's not just about Colin Kaepernick. That's about a deeper issue that's emerging. And this becomes important because the way we talk about brands is so different now. And we've used this term bideology to think about the fact that these beliefs become more and more important. As a brand, you don't have as much control over your brand anymore. Right? We're in a culturally connected world. We're in a socially connected world. We've got media connection. And so you as a brand don't have that control to be able to say, this is the message that I'm sending out. The message is being constructed not just by you, but also by your consumers. And it's this more public type of branding that's being shared among a variety of different people that are communicating. And brands now, the way they've responded to that is they're humanizing their brands. Knorr has Salty the Salt Shaker, who has a Twitter page and a Facebook page, and you might even find him on chat roulette instead of some shirtless dude, right? And so they're responding, they're talking back to people, and we're humanizing those brands. And when we humanize those brands, we want them to share our beliefs. We want them to respond the way we expect other people to respond. And we want them to take a stand. We want them to think about causes and be a part of those causes and take a position on those causes. Mm-hmm. So the question then is why should your brand care about this?
Yeah. And there was a study done in 2017. It was a global study of 14,000 consumers in 14 countries, so not a small sample. And what they found is 50% of these consumers are belief-driven buyers, which what that means is that they'll buy your brand, they'll boycott your brand, they'll distract or criticize your brand if they don't align with what your brand believes in and what they know your brand believes in. So it does have an impact. It's going to have an impact. And I know what you're thinking. You know, half of my customers are terrible people, but they're not. And there's hope, because when we look at the next generation, millennials, that number goes to 60%. And then I think, you know, all the research out there that I'm reading, it looks like Gen Z is even more belief-driven. So the movement's there. The consumers are shifting. Their expectations of what brands stand for and are asking you guys to stand for is important.
And the question is then, is this only in certain categories, right? I mean, we know that the millennials are out buying their organic avocado toast. No offense to the millennials. We've had fair trade coffee, you know, so maybe in certain categories we're seeing this, but is this something that every business should be thinking about?
Yeah, we were looking, and I think some of this stuff might not be new to people in the room, but you know, we've seen a shift of investing. So investing, looking at more ethical investing. So like 54% of consumers are saying we want to invest more ethically. So you're starting to see more beliefs injecting into an investing environment. We're seeing a really interesting number from Mintel, the research company, talking about sports and saying 80% of consumers want sports teams to actually take a stand on more controversial issues, which is really interesting when you look at the political environment in the US and some of the things that are happening. It seems like they're saying one thing and maybe doing another, but they still want them to take a stand. And the last one, in that same study of those belief-driven buyers, we're seeing when we sort it by affluent, it's almost the same as millennials. It's almost up around 60%. So whether it's a vertical or whether it's a specific target, it seems like it's all shifting that way.
So we're seeing this across multiple verticals. We're seeing that it's occurring in multiple spaces, and that consumers are demanding it or expecting it from companies in all sorts of different categories. It's not just limited. Mm-hmm. Yet the question is then, why aren't more brands doing this? Why aren't we seeing more people engage in this conversation?
Yeah, and it's interesting because it feels like they're stuck between this rock and a hard place, this idea of, you know, almost 60% will buy or boycott your brand based on their social and political position. But then you look on the other side, and of those belief buyers, 65% won't even buy it if you stay silent. So they're saying, well, we're going to punish you if you talk and we don't agree, but we're also going to punish you if you don't say anything. So it is a difficult position, and the clients that I work, you know, some of them are actually stepping back, saying we're not going to talk about anything except for maybe our products and services. That's it. We're not going to get involved in any cultural conversation. And in my opinion, I think now is the time we need it.
Yeah, I think it's important that you have to take the mic, right? You've got to step up to the mic, and you're going to have to take some sort of role and take some sort of position in this. The question is what do you say once you step up to that mic, and are you doing it the right way? And so as we thought about this and talked about this a little bit more, we said, okay, well, most people in this room probably have a CSR initiative with their company, and are we talking about something here that's different from CSR, right? Is it something that, isn't this just the latest manifestation? And maybe it is. We've had corporate social sorry, I was just about to get there. Thank you. Corporate social responsibility has been something that many companies have done. We've seen corporate philanthropy going back for quite a while. You know, we could go back to the Rockefellers, and there were donations in corporate philanthropy. We've seen companies then modify that where they donated as part of their marketing effort, or they tied themselves into some sort of cause. Unfortunately, the cynical view of CSR is that it's that thing you do in the corner so that you can just do your regular business, right? It's that piece that you engage in, or you spend money, or you give or support a cause, but it's not really central to what you do or who you are. And so increasingly, we're seeing firms are starting to say, we need to be thinking more about social purpose. We need to be thinking about the DNA and what our organization is really all about, not just that we're going to spend some money and make it go away. And it's that cynical view that is leading to things like people thinking of greenwashing, right? Thinking that a company isn't really environmental, they're just spending money on it to make people think they are. So the question then is, what do we gain from doing this when we do step up to the mic?
Yeah, there's a couple of big benefits. One, when we look at the next generation in terms of what their expectations of a brands are, the big impact being almost 50% need to believe in a brand's value to talk about them on social. And I think, as we see companies using social to promote and it having actually a big impact in terms of how consumers engage with a brand, it is a big place where aligning with a brand is important. Beyond that, things like they're willing to pay a premium, they'll advocate for your brand, they'll defend it, they'll criticize their competitor set. They're more loyal, and then frankly, you'll attract new buyers, so people that are interested in trying your product for the first time. So finding these belief-driven buyers is important, and because it's growing, it's going to be an important target.
So as we were putting this together, we thought, all right, this is great, right? These are the things that everybody wants, right? We want buyers that are going to be more loyal to our brand. We want people that are going to select our brand relative to another. But when you're then working with your clients and you want to walk them through, how should they do this, right? The step is how do we step up and actually make this happen? So when you're working with critical mass and a client says they want to enter this space, what are some of the things you do with them to help them enter that space?
Yeah, when we first talking, I think, we have a kind of questions that we ask, but I put them in steps, but don't think of them as steps. Think of them as things that you need to do as an organization to be successful in kind of joining the cultural conversation. So we have 7 here. We'll show you some examples of them in practice, but the first one is, incorporate this cause and purpose into your brand's DNA. Look at your mission statement. Does it stand for something? Does it mean something in the cultural context? Is super important. The next one Scott talked a little bit about is these moments. So identify resonant moments that make sense for that mission that you're a part of. And some of these moments might be real-time moments, and some of them might be pre-planned moments. So we'll know in advance the moment that you should talk about. So the third one is lead from the top. And in most cases, I think organizations try and take grassroots initiatives, but in this case, because you're kind of joining a conversation that could be political or could have some sort of negative impact on your business, I think leadership from the top is really important. We need the executives of the organization to actually buy in. If you look at some of the successful advertising or the successful brands that can do it, their CEOs are very involved in the movement. They are outside of their brand taking on that movement. The Coke CEO said he was a feminist and believed in that cause, and he was a part of that cultural community. So, and it reflected in some of the advertising that they took on. The fourth one is operationalize those values. What are the groups within your or what are the departments within your company, and how are they going to react to that mission? How are they going to take that on? How are you going to measure your success against that mission? We're going to show you an example of how Airbnb measures their mission against what they're due. Fifth one is learn and understand the language. I think a lot of the mistakes that companies make is they don't understand the language that they're trying to participate in. Yes, you want to keep your brand's tone and you want to make sure that you're coming across in the right way, but you also have to know the language that you're trying to take on when you're trying to talk to a specific culture or a cultural, join that conversation. Sixth one is demonstrate some action. Like Scott was saying, right now it feels like a lot of companies are just donating, which is a great step, but what's the action that you're going to take beyond that? It can't just stop there. We showed an Audi commercial, and I love the fact that they're going out there talking about equality and that message, but that's it. That's the only thing they've done. And I think we saw some news saying that they actually were found that they're not paying women equal. So, saying one thing and not following through is a big part. And the last step is build or join the community. So find the community, join it, participate in it on a regular basis. Don't just do it because that moment required you to do it. Do it because that's part of who you are as a brand. And if there isn't one, create one.
So we've included these 7 on your table cards. So hopefully it's something you'll be able to take away with you and think about maybe how it applies to your company. But this is great in theory, but we thought, well, let's share some examples of how this has actually occurred in practice. Let's talk about instances where companies said, we're calling the good, the bad, and the ugly. So ones that have really nailed it, that have done a great job with implementing these 7 steps as part of what their company is doing. The bad, ones that are not so bad, not a bad example, but maybe they've missed on 1 or 2 of those points and they haven't quite put all the pieces together. And then the ugly we'll save for the end because that's going to be the most fun. So Scott, why don't you start us off with the good?
So the good, the example that I chose is Airbnb, and if you're not familiar, I'm assuming everyone's familiar with them. They're a community-based you can rent out your apartment to other people. So that's what their job is. And when they first started, this is their mission statement, belong anywhere, so anyone can belong anywhere. And when they first started as a company, this is not what it was. They were simply in the business to create rental properties for consumers. And I think once they found momentum in the business, their CEO, Brian Chesky, looked internally and found that their community expected more from them. And he expected more from their company, and they did a lot of global research. They talked to the community. They went out there and discovered that this is what they felt, this is what people felt when they stayed in a great place, was their feeling of belonging anywhere. So with that as their mission, I think they had some really great direction in terms of how they respond to cultural moments. And just last year, one of those cultural moments became the travel ban in the US, and this is how the CEO of Airbnb responded. And I think not only did it make sense for them to respond this way, I think they had to respond this way. Their community, based on that belonging anywhere, they had to do this. So they joined the conversation. It made sense for them to do it. It was a part of who they were. Their community expected them to do that. They came out with a Super Bowl spot, if you're familiar. We showed it in the reel, this idea of we accept. They literally bought the Super Bowl spot on a Thursday. They shot it that night with employees to make a statement, draw a line in the sand saying, we believe in this, we don't agree with what's being said. And in terms of action, they also came out and said, we're going to contribute $4 million to this rescue community to help in this cause. And then recently, if you're following them or if you're familiar with Airbnb, they actually just recently invested $6 million of advertising with the latest comment from the president of the US talking about shithole countries, and he actually bought media to advertise Airbnb places in those countries, saying actually, we disagree with that statement, and so we're going to promote those countries.
Yeah, they actually said we think these are great places to visit, right?
Yeah.
Was sort of the way they termed it in that tweet. So what we saw here with the Airbnb is I think we can look at how they've hit all of those points, right? I mean, this is central to the DNA of who they are as a brand. They recognize this inclusive nature around different countries, different cultures, different populations, and then they've keyed in on those resonant moments. When the first cases of the travel ban, the more recent one now with the comments from the president about different countries, and it's very clear that the leader is guiding this, and so we see really all of these steps are appearing in that process. So let's move on to the bad.
Yeah.
And the bad I think is interesting because they do a lot right in this case.
Yeah.
But they missed.
They missed, yeah. So I wanted to pick a lesser known brand to show you that it's not just big brands, it can be lesser known brands. So Straight Street Global Advisor investment company. They have a mission of, we believe in investing responsibly enables an economic prosperity and social progress. And how what they've seen is that in this case, they're saying the more women we have on board of directors, the more diversity we have on boards, the more less risk adverse companies are, which makes them a better investment for their clients. To respond to that, on the eve of International Women's Day, they installed the Fearless Girl statue to make a statement about how the strength of women. And this is one of those things that, as an advertiser, when I saw it, I wish I had done this. It was, as a father of a daughter, I showed her, and she was super excited, and the momentum around this statement was huge, made a huge impact. They also, in terms of action, they followed up with sending letters to board of directors of companies, asking them to be more diverse in their boards. So these steps don't have to be monumental steps in terms of action, but they need to, we need to take action. Where they fell down was when this came out. Deciding that this company is paying women less, even though they're standing for this moment, almost sucked the air out of the momentum of what their brand was trying to move forward with. So they missed that critical step.
Yeah, I think it's that step 4 that they really missed here, right? Is
Yeah.
that they didn't operationalize that value into what they were doing, right? So then it seems like they're just paying lip service to this. If it's not something that becomes central to what you do, then it can undermine all the other good that you might have been doing in this particular cause. I think this contrasts really nicely against a campaign that REI did, where they engaged in the same space, where they wanted to look at gender empowerment, they wanted to look at the way women were engaged in their organization, and they wanted to strongly encourage women to participate and get outside and be a part of outside sports and outside activities. But then when they went to launch the campaign, they looked internally and they realized they weren't paying women equally, and they didn't have as many women in management positions. So instead of launching the campaign, REI actually stepped back and fixed it.
Yeah.
Then they launched the campaign. And that was one that we included in the reel at the beginning as well.
The Force of Nature campaign, if you're interested in going to see it, there's a case study online about it, but it's really interesting that they held back for almost a year to fix their internal things.
Yeah. All right, the ugly. So we were almost embarrassed to show this ad in the reel, and we won't subject you to it again because it's that bad. And in some ways, this is one of the first ones we talked about, and this is the, which of the Jenners was it? Kylie Jenner? Okay, Kendall Jenner. I can never get the Jenners straightened out. So Kendall Jenner with Pepsi, right? And so this was latching onto the moment of some of the moments around the Black Lives Matters protests and some of those issues around race that were happening in the United States, and Pepsi decided they were going to be a part of this.
Yeah. How many people have actually seen that commercial before today? Yeah. We talk about those steps and we talk about embedding it in their DNA. This is, you don't have to read this, but this is Pepsi's mission statement. A premier consumer product company producing financial rewards to investors. It's really hard to find a place to join that conversation when this is your mission as a company. And I don't disagree with this, and it was probably written by a very smart business student. But it doesn't have a place for them to join any conversations. In contrast, on the left, your left, my right, you're going to see the Coke mission statement: to refresh the world, to inspire moments of optimism and happiness, to create value and make a difference. Now, I would suggest that they almost say the same thing, but one leads you to have the ability as a company and as a brand to join conversations that let you do this, and one doesn't. One makes you feel inauthentic to do that.
And we're not talking about two companies here that are, one that's successful and one that's not successful, right? I mean, we're contrasting this against Coke, which is one of the most powerful brands in the world, one of the largest consumer packaged goods companies in the world. So you can be successful, you can be profitable as a firm, even though you're engaging in these spaces and not sort of always having to have that financial profit as the main driver.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, to me, not only was this spot a bad advertising, it missed the mark completely in terms of what that community was talking about. It had every trope of millennial in it. It was just not very, very well done. You know, when they launched it, they took it down right away. This was what they said via Twitter. Not even their CEO came out and said it. It was just Pepsi was trying to project a global message of unity, peace, and understanding. Well, that's great, but you actually didn't. This is the only time you've ever done it. This is the only time you've tried to do it. You actually need to do this more before you actually go and try and do something this large at this scale. There was a lot of quotes around what they did wrong and how they did it wrong. I thought this one was really great because it talks about, you know, talking about how they were late to the party and that the ad seemed exploitive. The late to the party for me means that they hadn't done anything. Not only was this going on for years, that they hadn't been a part of the conversation, but part of their brand, their mission, didn't mean anything. So yes, it felt exploitive and didn't make any sense. It was just, oh, this is happening. Let's use it as a marketing opportunity.
And it feels inauthentic, right? It doesn't feel like who they are as a brand. And we've talked about this a little bit in our sort of earlier conversations, but I wonder could Coke have entered this conversation in a way that Pepsi couldn't have, right? Like, does Coke have a cred or a history that Pepsi doesn't have? And would they have been able to enter that conversation?
Yeah, I think Coke could enter this conversation. If you look at the last 60 years, whether it's in the 60s, Coke did the segregation bench. They were the first ones to put African Americans in advertising. They've done the Indian-Pakistan advertising. So they've done a lot in terms of bringing the global community together.
Right.
Yeah.
So really, to wrap up, when we look at that final Pepsi ad or where they sort of fell short in that case, and really thinking about these things and how could you apply these to your business, right? Where Pepsi missed was that they didn't incorporate that into their DNA. This wasn't who they are. It's not central to who they are. So then it just seems like it's that, again, that corporate social responsibility seeming as a cynical thing, a thing you do over here so that you can do your business the way you normally do it, and hopefully you sort of silence the critics, perhaps, by approaching it that way.
Let's find an internet celebrity to hawk our product and be a part of it.
Exactly, yeah. They did identify the resonant moment, but maybe not one that they were engaged with the whole movement, right? Their social purpose was not tied to that moment. It was an inappropriate moment. So it was maybe not resonant.
And I would say they didn't learn the language and they didn't understand the community, for sure.
Right, and clearly when they had the problem, the leadership wasn't there, right? It was a tweet rather than actually a comment from the leadership itself. So they weren't behind that throughout the entire organization.
Yeah.
So I think our takeaway today is, can you embed this in your organization? Are these pieces that you could think about as you think about what you stand for? What are those movements that are out there that might be relevant to your particular brand? Those movements that somehow you can engage with, and then engage with them in a more fulsome way, not just something that you do in the corner.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that's the end for us.
Yeah.